Hi, I'm Pastor Tish Webb, and this is Spiritual Warfare.
When the shadows try to gather and the whispers speak of doubt, when the walls feel so much higher and there's no easy way out, we remember who has called us, we remember who has claimed the victory is already won by the power in his name. The Lord is a warrior, the Lord is his name.
Hey, glad you're here today. It's going to be a wonderful day because with Jesus, we are going to be blessed. Okay, I'm going to talk about changes that are happening in a day. There's a old Bible story about a city that was boarded up and the enemy had them all stuck in the city and they were running out of food. And, they were eating, a donkey's head and the poop of a pigeon and all this kind of stuff. And because they had nothing and they were starving and they were dying basically. And so a prophet said that things were going to change and very quickly. And the story goes that the enemy outside misinterpreted what was going on. Misinterpreted, God did this. They thought something was happening that wasn't happening, and so they fled. And they were so scared, the enemy is so scared, that they left all their goods, all their stuff, all their food, all their clothes, everything that would resupply a city, And so the people that were sitting outside the city, which were the outcasts, the lepers, near the area, they thought, well, we might as well go check it out because we're going to die one way or the other. They don't want to be around us, and we have leprosy, so we're going to pass because of that. And if we go into the camp, then they could kill us. They didn't know that everything was gone. So when they go in, they discover what God had done for the people inside the city. He had turned things around. And the one person that said, well, that can't happen. Do you ever have people tell you when God tells you something, they say, that will never happen. Oh, you can't be blessed if you're giving 10% of your income back to the Lord because that's already his anyway, okay? He's giving you 90% to live on. And that can't happen if you sow a seed offering. That can't happen if you should do other things on your day off on Sunday. You'd only get, Sunday to rest. You shouldn't get up early and go to the church for, a service. You can watch it online. People got all kinds of excuses why God can't do something and why they can't believe for it. All right. So this man who was giving them a lot of negative reports, he got trampled underfoot when all of them come out and found out that all of this was happening. It's all there for them. If you'd won the major prize on The Price is Right, and you're running everybody down to get to it. It's kind of like that, only major, okay? Masses coming out, hungry, starving people coming out and realizing provision was made for them. Okay, so we're seeing today nations that have been boarded up, so to speak, spiritually. There's no spiritual food for them. One of them is Venezuela. And for about 3 decades, they were under a tyrannical government. And they were being groomed by countries that are already oppressive. China, Russia, Cuba. Cubans will tell you in Miami, they're very prosperous people, but in Cuba, they were cast out, they were abused, they were killed, tortured, so that the communist regime could take over. And so everything today is just a pile of rubble. And so Venezuela, they were where they were eating their pets just to stay alive. Sounds like the Old Testament story, doesn't it? They were killing cats and dogs and zoo animals just to stay alive. And so people were praying, but it seemed like, is anything going to happen? I read one account where there was a massive, beautiful mall built, for prosperity, because Venezuela was very prosperous at one point in time. Well, let's go back up a little bit more. Venezuela was an agricultural nation, and then they had this oil, but it was very crude and very thick. It was unlike the oil in Middle East, which was finer, doesn't have to have as much work to refine it and use it. Their oil had to be processed more. And they didn't have the engineers to do that, but America had engineers that knew how to do that because they had been doing that with a lot of the oil here that was being found. And so they sent people there to help them and show them how to build these plants. And they were being very prosperous as a nation. And then they forgot how, the God that prospers and gives abundance. And they believed lies and they went under socialism. But part of it was also criminal election results. And so with that happened almost 30 years of torture. Some of the stories that come out at that mall was turned into a prison. And many of the people would be tortured, hung by their limbs. Their heads would be put into excrement and told to breathe or die. Pastors were arrested left and right. And so when it seems like all of a sudden, but in a moment, so to speak, the prayers, the plans, everything came together and things were overturned. And they said, the prisoners came out and the people were so ecstatic that they were able to see loved ones that were still alive, not even knowing if they were still alive. And many did not survive this regime. And so the ones that fled the country are, celebrating, crying, 90-year-olds crying because they didn't know if they would ever see this happen. Sometimes you think, am I ever going to see the victory I've prayed for? Am I ever going to see my loved ones saved, their souls saved from darkness? Am I ever going to see this healing that I need? Am I ever going to see my family, situations turned around, my marriage, my adult children, whatever it is that the enemy has stolen? Am I going to see that? And we think, can it happen? And so just, in the last week or so, we're seeing this change happen and great rejoicing. And it's pushing back really around the world. So Venezuela is getting freed. And now we're seeing Iran is becoming free, and it will eventually completely eradicate this horrific regime that came in. It was a beautiful nation, very rich nation Iran was at one point in time. And people were very, colorful, and their clothing, their culture, everything was a beautiful. And then under Islam it's oppressive, dark garments to just cover you up, and you cannot sing, and you cannot have joy, and all these things that are pushed down. Islam and communists, almost like two hands together, right? Yeah. So now, Iran was having dreams of Jesus because of all the prayer. Maybe we couldn't get a lot of things in there. We got prayer in there. And then, you get people like some of those that are controlling the government saying, I'm shutting down all communications. You cannot hear from anybody outside. You're not going to be able to hear from any loved ones or anything, any news. That happened years ago across Europe and Russia, and we built this facility right out here close to Cincinnati called Victory, the Voice of Freedom, Victory Tower out there. And that, then when communism fell, and in Germany, a lot of the radio broadcasts and things like that weren't needed as much anymore because now you have television, you have the internet going through. So what does Iran do? They shut down the internet. But God has given revelation to other people. Now, I'm not saying that I'm all 100% behind a lot of people, but I'm just saying if they're bringing forth something that's helping free other people, and that was this Elon Musk guy, let them all use the satellite communications for the internet. So they'll still be able to communicate between each other. But in days past, before even all of this, the Holy Spirit would work this intelligence communication. There are stories of evangelists being called to nations, and all they would have is just go to that nation, and then I'll give you the instructions when you get there. And so, the evangelist, he shows up in that nation, and somebody just happens to be there at the port when the ship gets in, and is looking for the very person that they are. God has this. It almost makes you laugh how amazing it is how God works. And the stories were always so wonderful and encouraging. And now we're having all of these stories of people getting dreams and knowing that Jesus is for them, so they must fight against this evil. And we didn't really have to go and do anything, just like the miracles of the past where they just went, somebody shows up, and they've got whatever this person needed to evangelize that nation or to preach the gospel there for so many meetings or whatever they were called to do. Chile is another one that's had a turnaround in their voting. They have come out of, they weren't total complete socialism, but they've started moving toward a more freedom in their government and their nation and who they're electing. So things are opening up, and we should be encouraged. Bulgaria is another one. We've got, again, sheep and goat nations. Bulgaria is standing up. Poland stood up and said, we're not having some of this agendas that are coming from the West, nations in the West. We're not having it. We are a Christian nation, and we are going to continue to be a Christian nation. So we're not receiving that. Now, a lot of the powers that be with money have gone into African nations and said, we will help you, but you've got to accept this ideology, this political movement, this, that, yeah. And some of the heads of those nations have stood up against it, and some of them have been slain because of it. So we have to know that it doesn't matter how bad it looks, God's always got a victory coming. And if we will stand firm and continue to do what we're supposed to do, we will start seeing the hand of God over the situation. I will see the Lord in the land of the living. The word tells us that. I will see his hand in the land of the living. So I'm going to leave you with this one, and that is France. France for years, right now France is being overridden with Islam, but there's such hope because the young generation is getting hungry. They've had religion, and then they've had this, like in the 1950s, they only had like 50,000 churches. Now they're starting an evangelical church that's, non-Catholic, Protestant, even church every 10 days in France. Is that amazing? It's amazing. And the French and, a lot of us Americans, we're all a blend, we're like this blend of this nation and that nation because of our ancestors. I have some of that. Some of my family were Fuquas, and they live in Lafayette, which is spelled Lafayette, in Tennessee. And so, I would think that I would read some things about France and all. And one of the horrible, ugly things about France is they pushed the Huguenots out. The Huguenots were the prophetic people, and they started persecuting them so much. And they pushed them out, and many of them went in the Louisiana area, and many, settled in different places. And I think, God still forgives, and he still blesses, even with your history of that. So I want you to know that there is a very encouraging time to live is today. As a young child, we lived during the time when there was the Russian and the communist nations with split of Germany, where if we had any kind of warning, we were to get under our desk for a bomb could go off, when it was the fear of the communism coming to our nation type of thing, sort of thing. We think it's silly now, but back then that's what they did. like that desk was going to protect us from a nuclear explosion or some kind of bomb. And we, you thought, oh, that could never fall. That would big old bad communism. We have to fight this ugly, ugly evil. And today people get a little overwhelmed with evil and they think, how are we ever going to fight it? It falls left and right. But it takes people that are going to persevere in prayer, that are going to continue to speak up. When you're at your workplace, you do need to speak up because somebody may be listening and it may be falling seed on good ground. Now, you may get pushback. That's okay. I remember getting a lot of pushback when I would speak up about something. Doesn't matter. But being some kind of scaredy cat. You'll never win any battles that way. Now, you may get some enemies, but you got enemies anyway. You just didn't know it. So you might as well flush them out with your boldness and with your declarations, and just start speaking the truth over things and continue to declare and call out things that are not as though they were. And I will guarantee you that this year is going to be such a surprising year of what's going to happen. I know 2025 had a lot of great things happen, but there were disappointments as well. But we're coming into such a level with all of the prayer, fasting, with all of the people, starting to get hungry for the things of God. We're coming into a time that we're going to be almost amazed at what's happening. So I want to encourage you today to be bold, to speak up, to declare, to give news that's not being filtered through some rich, evil person's money. Okay? If you don't do it, who's going to? Well, I love you. And I know sometimes I can be a real serious, but I think we live in serious times that calls for a boldness that we all possess if we'll just grab a hold of it, because it's in the Holy Ghost, and Christ has given us that for these last days. Love you, and I'll see you next time.
Days are done. The battle has begun. I'm loading up my spirit with the power of the sun.